And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And up first, today's sea ice analysis showing those southwest winds here blowing the ice back to the northeast here, but still some pretty good heavier ice right into Bristol Bay. And that northeastward retreat will slow with the winds becoming more north-northwest here, and then eventually westerly, so that'll definitely slow that retreat back to the north and northeast. And for the forecast for tonight, this front coming southward, winds will go northwest, west-northwesterly for the Pribilof Islands tonight, and also over the eastern Bering Sea there along the ice edge. Otherwise, rain and snow, mostly snow in the interior, rain down Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, pushing in toward the Aleutians, just ahead of that front. Breakaway low here brings rain and snow into Kenai Peninsula, Manuska Valley, eastward across the southern Copper River Basin, especially the North Gulf Coast into Yakutat, but dry for the Panhandle. For tomorrow, rain for all of the southeast coast, extending back up along the North Gulf Coast into the Coast Range there, maybe into the Wrangell Mountains, but not too much in the Copper River Basin. This pretty active trough here with the colder air behind it and snow showers will push right up to the Alaska Range. Low pressure in the interior associated with a widespread area of light snow there. From the eastern Arctic coast right on down into the northern Kuskokwim Valley, right up to the Alaska Range. And then for the next day, drying out and clearing out south central Alaska. A trough here keeps it cloudy with areas of light snow from the Kuskokwim Delta right up into the Kobuk Valley and eastward there along the Brooks Range to the eastern Arctic coast. This low keeps conditions wet for the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And for the coastal water forecast, west-southwest, 20-25 knots on the south coast, south 25 central coast, and east-southeast, 30 to 35 knots on the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds, 25 knots, seas 5 feet, and 20 gusts 30 knots out of the south for Stevens Passage with Clarence Strait, southwest at 15. And for the day Saturday, mostly south to southeast winds, 10 to 15 knots for the central southern inner channels, but Lynn Canal could be up to 20 knots out of the southeast. West-southwest, 15 to 20 on the south coast, central coast, light southwest wind at 15. And the north coast, also a light south to southeast breeze at 15 knots. Prince William Sound, small craft advisories, southeast winds 25 knots for Friday with 4-foot seas, and west to southwest winds for the North Gulf Coast at 25 knots with 11-foot seas, west 25 for the Barren Islands. Kamishak Bay, west winds 30 knots, Southern Cook Inlet, southwest 30, 25-knot winds north of the Forelands. And for Saturday, light northwest breeze here for northern Cook Inlet, not much different to the south here, west 15, but Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, west and northwest winds at 30 knots there. But for the North Gulf Coast, light variable winds laying down to 10 knots, and Prince William Sound, variable to northwest breeze at 10 knots, seas down to 2 feet. Kodiak Island, west-southwesterlies at 30 knots, west winds 25 to 30 knots for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay. For Saturday, northwest winds here for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, 25 to 30 knots in those areas, and about the same for Kodiak Island, northwest 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians, west winds 20 to 25 knots for Friday, west 25 for Adak and Atka, and west-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots for the Western Aleutians. Outlook for Saturday, Western Aleutians, south to southwest winds only at 20 knots. Light variable winds under high pressure for Adak and Atka, laying down really good in those areas, seas down to 4 feet, and Eastern Aleutians northwest, 15 to 25 knots. Southwest coast for tomorrow, northwest winds, 25 knots. St. Lawrence Islands, northwest at 30 knots, and northwest at 30 knots for Norton Sound. I think I said northwest 25 here for the southwest coast. Anyway, west 25 for St. Matthew Island and northwest at 25 for the Pribilofs. And for the day on Saturday, St. Paul, St. George, southwest winds 20 knots, seas 7 feet, southwest 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, and Kuskokwim Delta coast west at 25. Otherwise, St. Lawrence Island, the Yukon Delta coast west at 20 knots. And for the central and eastern Arctic coast, west winds 25 knots. Western Arctic coast, west winds 25 knots. And gale warnings for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, northwest winds at 35 knots. It's going to be a little brisk up there tomorrow. And then for Saturday, winds coming down north to northwest here for the Chukchi Sea at 25 knots. Otherwise, the western and central Arctic coast looking at west winds, brisk wind advisories, west at 25 knots. West-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast.